I've used StreamYard, I was like, hello, we are live. We are live. I was just saying, I always get really surprised when we're on StreamYard because it goes quicker than I'm expecting. But here we are, we're live. Welcome. Shooting the shit, and it's the first time we've got us three back in ages, isn't it? But like literally months and months since the three of us did it. Hannah is going to join us in a minute, so she will jump on. She's just sorting out the child and her swimming, and she will be with us. So today we are talking about sexism in the workplace, which sounds really bloody obvious because we are a feminism plus business thing, entity, show, channel, whatever you want to call us. So yeah, obviously sexism in the workplace is the thing that we talk about all the time. But specifically what we are going to talk about is how do you deal with your sexist workplace friend without being labelled a feminist fun sponge. So we have all probably at times been labelled feminist fun sponges, haven't we? And we shall talk about that. We shall discuss that. Okay, you just both look completely bemused. Like,
I was going to say, I think that's from personal experience, Rach. I don't think we.
I'm the only feminist fun sponge here. All right, fair enough. So first of all, facts and figures. 8.2 million people in the UK say that they have experienced sexism in the workplace based on gender, obviously. That means 26%, about 26% of the workforce say that they've experienced gender-based discrimination. But this, I was a bit shocked when I read this. I don't know whether you two have read this. Men are more likely to say that they have been discriminated against on the grounds of gender than women are. So I was reading a few articles to back this up, and apparently, so you know, women will speak out and say yes, they think they've been discriminated against, blah blah blah, but they will usually only do that when it gets to the point that it's really explicit. So the kind of day-to-day what do they call it, like background sexism, women will tend to let go and they'll only speak out when it becomes really obvious in their face and detrimental to their careers. Men, however, will say that they have been discriminated against much more readily because they basically on the basis of all these women came and the reason I haven't been promoted is because there's so many women in the workplace taking all of my jobs. So it might be a little bit of, what's that word, you know, when people are always complaining that they're being oppressed when actually it's just fairness that's come into their lives. So let's talk about that. Hello, Hannah Weinhold. How are you?
Hello, very well, thank you. Sorry I'm late.
That's all right. You're having a nice time at the swimming baths?
It's the best time of my life.
Oh, marvellous. Well, I've just given some facts and figures, but I was saying when I was researching this beforehand, more men than women. So apparently about 26% of the UK workforce say they've been discriminated against. More than half of those people in that cohort are actually men, and they're the ones that say that they've been discriminated against on the grounds of gender because they haven't been promoted, or you know there are too many women, they haven't been able to progress or whatever in their workforce. So let's go. First of all, Jo, have you experienced sexism in the workplace, or have you ever had a really sexist workplace friend?
So I'm a bit different to you lot, probably in this way. So my main employment has been in an all-women environment. But that's not to say there hasn't been sexism. It's just that it's tended to be a different environment where it's actually, you'd like to think that it's like some kind of utopia, wouldn't you, when it's all just like women together. But it ain't. And there can still be sexism.
Yeah.
So it would be a little bit of a yes. Yes, I've experienced it generally, probably less aimed at me.
So when you say there was still kind of sexism, how did that manifest itself then in your workplace? Because you were in publishing, weren't you, for those who don't know? So what was it? Because there's two levels of it. There's the explicit stuff, which is someone saying you can't do that because you're a girl. And then there's the kind of underlying sexism, which is just like where certain job roles are assigned. So basically you would assume that the CEO is a man and that the secretary is a woman. That's the kind of base sexism, isn't it? So how did it manifest in your workplace?
It tended to be around more whether the employee was a mother, had children, had different needs. And it tended to be around those types of difficult circumstances, requests for flexible working. And, I'd even, that certain things I'd hear is like, well, they've made their personal choice. And, it was just like, that kind of attitude, which, when you think, it's not down with the sisterhood, is it? So kind of amazing how it was still part and parcel. Those kind of attitudes that you might expect came from, maybe you'd expect from a male boss, was just as prevalent from the women in the company.
But it's interesting that, isn't it? Because we're as institutionalized in the patriarchy as the men.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, Hannah, what were you going to say then?
A lot of the workplaces I've been in, the sexism has come from women as well, and a lot of it has been man bashing, as well as just accepting these gender roles. And I think it's really important to just highlight that we're not always talking about sexism against women. And I remember when I used to work in an office full of women, and I had a baby while I was there, and the comments like, oh, I bet your husband's useless, and oh, I bet he never does anything, and my husband never does anything, and aren't they rubbish, and men, they're all the same and stuff. And I used to say, well, no, actually, he's not like that. Oh God, well. So, it's not just the men, but is like kind of banter around the office as harmful as institutionalized sexism, where it's actually harming someone's career prospects.
Why did you do that?
Yeah. Why did she do that? Go find out. Why did she do that?
Go on. I love it.
So, I mean, it's a very good point that actually it genuinely does work both ways, doesn't it? There is, and I think it is a symptom of frustration as much as anything, but there is a lot of kind of man bashing that goes along. And I'm Joe. I mean, if you were in an all-female workplace, did you get that? Was there a lot of that? Oh, men are bloody useless, blah blah blah.
Probably not that I am aware of, but that also I was thinking about this, as I do, getting prepped for our conversations. It makes you dig deep, and it also, because I was in the same sort of environment for years. I grew up with my values around workplace were all made in this one place, and looking back, I'm like, ooh, that wasn't okay. Whereas at the time, I wouldn't have thought to question it. So it's hard to delve down. I mean, we did used to have one man in the department, and there was definitely a lot of I'd look now and go, oof, if at any point it seemed, were we a bit inappropriate at times? Maybe, was he like token male, so he had a little jibe? Yes. Was it done though from a place of like, we don't like you and trying to pick on you? No, it was done with like, we love you. Yeah. There used to be times when we used to say like, shut your ears for this bit of woman talk coming up. So it's like, how much of that is, questioning myself now.
Someone's put a comment on the chat there. I'm sorry, because we've moved on to StreamYard, we can't see your names at the moment, so I apologise. I don't know who's commenting, but they've said it's because where they worked, again, there was a token man in the office, and the women are just used to the sexism. We've had it our entire lives, going back generations. It's kind of institutionalised in the workplace. Whereas because the men aren't used to the tables being turned in that way and of them being in the minority, they will notice it. So if there was ever an example of sexism against the men, they would then flag it up because they can see it so much clearly.
Because I was thinking about, Joe said that where in this office of women where I used to work, there was a male a male mailman. He would come in and deliver all the post. And he was pretty buff, to be fair to him. And all the women would, flock around him and, oh, aren't you lovely? And, oh, Michael, let me feel your muscles and stuff. And he just looked so uncomfortable. And I used to think if the tables were turned and it was, oh, let me feel your bum and stuff, they'd be sacked on the spot. And I think there's just a lot of, like, especially in older generations, just a lot of, like, sexual harassment that older women do to younger men. And you know, my husband has been groped out and about by older women, and there's been really inappropriate. Yeah, Meriesha is like fucking prime. Oh, give us feel your oranges.
What's the older gropey woman's view? Is it ever appropriate to grope a young man in the workplace?
Oh, young man!
For that older woman. Oh my god, I'm going full cougar. I don't care now. That's it. I've been labelled. That's it. I'm just going to touch you in the workplace. Oh my god, get a name for myself.
I don't think touching unsolicited touching is ever appropriate in the workplace, whatever gender.
And it's the workplace now a euphemism for where we're touching people. I want to touch him in the workplace.
Oh, I'd love to touch his workplace.
No, I mean, it's true, because one of my networking groups, you know, there was, we are primarily women who are between kind of the ages of 35 and 55, maybe. There are some men, but it's a majority female group, or it was at the time. And then this young lad joined, really nice young lad, you know, he was there.
Young man.
Young man, you know, and there was a little bit of, oh, now we've got some eye candy. Oh, now there's somebody fit to look at, you know, he was a personal trainer. And we're like, oh, yeah, show us your muscles. So, you know, we are all guilty of it, aren't you? You're absolutely right. If that was the other way round, you know, it would be so obvious, and we'd all be screaming blue murder about it. So why are we allowed these double standards? Reesh, go on, tell us.
What? Why'd you come to me with the complicated ones? I don't know.
You should know.
Yeah, just tell us about groping young men then.
That's not for this call. That's for another one.
Have to get paid for that one.
Exactly. But you know, I've kind of come of it from, you know, a similar position as well, in terms of, you know, in my tech world and my tech life, you know, it's primarily men, you know, in the workplace. But my most recent employment, even though that was a few years ago now, you know, I had a female boss, and she almost ran that as if it should, you know, if it was, you know, I had to stand up for the boys basically sometimes, you know, because they were of an age where they were starting families, you know, this, that, and the other. And there was always a question about care, for example, or, you know, if someone had to go off, you know, for a doctor's appointment, or, you know, this, that, and the other, or the kids were off ill, you know, it was very much her view of, well, can't your wife do that? Can't your girlfriend do that? You know, not so many words, but that was essentially it. Do you know what I mean? And so, you know, I kind of saw both sides of the things, because then I also saw actually how that really impacted them, you know, because they're also, I think, you know, sometimes the world forgets that, you know, men are, you know, heavily invested in children too, funnily enough. But also
guys.
Exactly, but like, they want to be there for this, you know, the parents' evening, and they want to be the one, you know, to pick up if you know, there's care, you know, and things like that. And it was almost like the workplace didn't allow that, you know. That, so I see it from that perspective, as well as me being raging. So.
A raging broken figure. We had that though, and I think I've told this story before, but when Leon was ill once, and I was in Sheffield with Hannah, and primary school rang and said, Leon's not very well, can someone come for him? So I was 2 hours away, and Dally was an hour away in Manchester. So it was like, you know, Dally, you're going to have to be the one who goes for him. And his boss said to him, he said, I'm going to have to go pick my son up. He's ill. I need to leave now. And his boss said, can your wife not do it? And that was a female boss. So, you know, we're absolutely right. This is the gender discrimination is not always men against women. This works both ways, and it can become quite toxic as well, can't it? Have any of you ever had to stand up for yourselves against something that was kind of sexist that was happening?
I remember in my previous job before Grow Traffic, like my most recent one, I jokingly had a sexist alarm where I would kind of smack the table and go, woo, 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 sexist alarm in meetings if something sexist was said. And I think, I did use it on numerous occasions, but I can't think of a single example now why. I think it was just, assumptions. And I think it's just sometimes low level. And it's so intrinsic in the system, and it's both men and women perpetuating it because it is so ingrained in our working lives, in our society, in our societal roles. And while I've never been knowingly passed up for a job because I'm a woman, or never been oh, don't let her speak because she's a girl, I think it just seeps into most interactions, just the gender stereotyped roles.
I think there is an element, I know I said at the beginning about being labelled the kind of the feminist fun sponge, but I think there's an element of that as well. So again, Hannah's going to laugh at me for Tales from the Garage.
Tales from the Garage! Mark it up on your bingo card!
But when they it was a mechanic's garage. Everybody was male. Everybody was fairly young. There were just there was just porn everywhere. And like naked women, big women. And when I said, and this, bearing in mind, I was only quite young. I was like 17 at the time. And I said, I don't really want to look at that. Like, I'm not saying you can't. I just don't want it on my laptop or whatever. Well, what I got then was, oh, for God's sake, stop being such a prude. And then I got this barrage of just the most obscure, obscene porn was just continually put on my computer screen every single day. So I'd come into women having sex with Shetland ponies and stuff, and it became to the point where I was like, there's just no point trying to fight this. I can't. And the whole thing I got back was, oh, don't be so boring. It's just a bit of fun. So I think there is an element of you don't want to stand up. You don't want to be that one that's pointing stuff out and being the office fun sponge and being the one who's always moaning about people. I don't know, have any of you ever encountered that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was always labelled as the ball breaking feminist was the expression that was used, and now I kind of introduced myself as that, and you've kind of got to own it, because you will just be seen as the fun sucker and stuff, which is why I had the sexist alarm, because I thought it was a fun way for me to confront it. Because your options are, you say in private, I'm sorry, I found that was really inappropriate, and they go, meh, and then nothing ever changes. Or you call it out on the day there and then and kind of try and nip it in the bud, in which case they slag you off behind your back and say it anyway. So what are your options?
I think as someone that's kind of, I'm not saying I've been a big manager with loads of people and teams and things like that, but I think that's where I struggle is if it isn't just said out in the open. If someone's got an issue with something, I kind of, that's how I am. It comes out without me even thinking about it. Do you know what I mean? If I've got a problem with something, so I just kind of say. But I do struggle, if someone is to, take that away, think about it, and then come back, because it feels like it's after the event then. So like, then what am I going to do? So it's also, I think, there's an awful lot of people that find themselves in jobs and in positions in jobs that are not necessarily, they may be able to do the job, but are not actually, trained for all the other stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff that comes with being a manager or a supervisor, or, if you're in a team or in control of a team in some way, shape or form, or have influence rather than control, then there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes with that doesn't really kind of, get taught. I kind of, my personal thought of how things are in the workplace, even still now, and it happens now, it's happening now, in something that I've got going on in a project. There are two people that are male, older, and they without even saying it's there. Do you know what I mean? There's something that's there that means that actually, if I've got to be heard, I've got to shout, and I fucking will shout. Do you know what I mean? If we're going to go there, that you will hear me, you know. But I don't want to. You know, my issue is that I don't want to. Why should I have to, you know, portray myself in this kind of way, you know, to be heard? That's what's the problem for me, you know.
And then the other thing is that you then get that label, don't you, of the ball breaking, you know, loudmouth feminist. This is the point when women raise their voice in either volume or tone in order to be heard equally amongst the men, then they're accused of being strident and of, you know, forcing their way in and being aggressive and all the rest of it. And it's actually, we're just trying to meet you know, where you are. But again, you're absolutely right, Rich. That's a very good point. And this is what I saw in the NHS as well when I worked there. You know, there would be nurses who they were really good at being a nurse, so they would be promoted to be in a position of being a manager. And actually, they'd never been trained as a manager. They're a nurse. Yeah. You know, they're great at that caring stuff and giving people injections and changing dressings. But managing an entire team and, you know, financial and personnel and all the rest of it, that requires a certain skill set. But then you come back to the point of, well, if we then bring in managers who are specifically trained managers, then they've never actually done the job. They've never worked on the shop floor or whatever. You know, how are they going to manage the team? So there is always that push and pull, isn't there? But I don't want us to go too deeply into management styles here. But
Rach, Jo looked absolutely outraged, and I want to know what she was going to say.
Go on,
I'm sorry. That's all I can think about. I think your garage story, probably the first, am I the only one who's only hearing that for the first time? I'm horrified. We're so young. No woman could ever be in a workplace come in to find porn of like bestiality. I'm gonna say it.
Because she loves horses, so they'd really tailored it as well.
Yeah, they'd really tailored the porn to but this is I mean, in one way, I was young, and that taught me, that job and that being in that position taught me how to hold my own, and it gave me an absolute shitload of confidence that I now benefits me. But yeah, when you look back, you just think, yeah, it's bloody horrific, isn't it? So someone's made a comment on the thing about about the boobs. I do think whoever this is just likes typing boobs because they've typed it 3 times in 2 comments. So showing them that.
It's a request, Rachel. It's a request.
Yeah. More titty shake. But yeah, it was, the boobs were prevalent, and it wasn't even, in the construction industry. Yeah, everyone likes looking at boobs, like the mechanic industry, but they were just in every paper. Literally everywhere you looked, there were boobs, and it was so. Again, it was just that drip feed all the time. Is Kirsty boobs? I don't.
But also, can I just? I'm not gonna, because we need to move on. But thinking about it. Rach, you just described that it taught you all those skills. I'm sorry, but for someone else, it could have a very opposite and very detrimental effect. So it's now. I mean, what would you do about that if that was now? Like,
if it was now, yeah. I mean, this is the thing. If it was now, I would challenge it completely differently. Absolutely. And I wouldn't, because I was so young and I was quite shy and meek, and I didn't want to be seen as the fun sponge. That's why I didn't carry on challenging it. But yeah, nowadays, absolutely I would. But that's coming from a position of privilege. And we're back to this point of, I am, I'm reaching middle age. I've got my own company. I'm much more comfortable in my own skin. I'm much more confident. I'm much more capable of walking into a room. And that's why it's on us to change the world for those young girls that aren't in that position of power, that can't say this is not acceptable. We've got to be the ones doing something and saying this is not on, because they're not capable of doing it, don't we?
Yeah, and educate your sons, because that was it 3 lads and a dad, and I remember when that was happening, and every time you said anything, they just upped it, and it was just fucking hilarious to them. They just all thought it was the most hilarious thing in the world. So even if you went in day after day and said this is not acceptable, this is not okay, there was nowhere to escalate it to, because it was a small family run garage. Your options are take it on the chin or leave your job, because it was just their attitude. And they, you know, they drank in the pub that we worked in, and they were the same there. It was just them. So, you know,
and everybody in that pub is the same. And so this is the kind of thing, you know, the title of the session was how to deal with it. So you know, some of the points that I think, and I've read a few articles on this as well from kind of HR providers who say this is an appropriate way to deal with it. So the first thing that they say is broach it with the person themselves, but in a non-confrontational way, because even if it is sort of overt sexism, they might genuinely not realize that that's what they're doing. And sometimes if you say quietly, you know, in a private corner, actually that was a bit off, then they might realize and say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way, and change it. If they don't,
sorry.
No, carry on. Go on.
Sometimes it's a cultural thing. I remember I had a colleague who was Irish and called me doll for like the first few weeks. And doll is just what the Irish women call Irish women, like hen or bird or whatever. And I said to him, like, I really don't like being called doll. And he was like, well, I just call everyone doll. I was like, I don't care that you call everyone doll. I don't like it. And I explained it. And he never said it to me again, which I think sometimes you just need to take the time to explain to someone why that's not okay.
Yeah, and you know, it's the same with love, isn't it? So we, you know, up here we call everybody love, whereas I remember going down south and somebody, I haven't said it, but somebody I was with had called somebody love, and they said, don't call me love. And again, that might genuinely just be a cultural thing that somebody hasn't realized. You know, it's non-gender specific. Everyone is love. So yeah, raise it non-confrontationally. If they then, you know, if that doesn't get you anywhere and that doesn't resolve it, the next step then is to speak to your colleagues, speak to people around you, see if they've also noticed it, see if they think that you might be overreacting or whether it's genuinely there. Try and get some allies on side. And then if there's a few of you, then you can escalate it either to the boss or to HR. But I think the key things that were kind of consistently said in all these things I was reading was, don't be aggressive, don't be angry, don't go in being, you know, this is not acceptable straight away. You know, just try and resolve it in a human way. But again, like, and I can see you grimacing, Hannah. We're back to, why shouldn't we just say, hang on, that's not on? Because in the reports I was reading about men, they are the ones who will stand up and go, hang on a minute, that's sexist, I'm not bloody having that. So again, is that standards?
Definitely. I need to go, guys, and pick up the kid.
Yeah, okay. Nice to speak to you soon. Bye. I do think as well, go on, Joe, yeah.
No, I was just thinking, I think a lot of it depends on the type of situation, because what you've just described, it could be that the comment wasn't intended to be that way. So then calling it out, say it was in a meeting and there's a lot of people and, you know, that's when it might be more appropriate just to have a quiet word with that individual. If it turns out they're actually just, you know, a sexist twat, then call them out in public in future. But, you know, maybe give them the benefit of the doubt, or, you know, I mean, this wasn't to do with sexism, but there was a time it was actually my MD used to jokingly, my surname's Grant, and he used to call me Grunt for some reason. Now, I found that offensive because my husband is a policeman. So I thought he meant it as detrimental to...
Pig.
But, but I had to explain this to, and even if he didn't mean it, I still was like, just don't call me this stupid nickname. And when I told him why, he was horrified and was very apologetic, and he, of course, never called me that again. So there is sometimes, you know, it's worth being, you know, giving someone the benefit of the doubt. But I think if you realise that they've actually meant it that way, that's a whole other ball game, isn't it?
It is, and I think genuinely as well, you can probably tell, you know, again, when I used to work in the garage, there used to be these like slimy salesmen that used to come in, you know, like car salesmen and stuff, and then they straight away you could tell that they were salesmen the minute they walked through the door, and they were all quite kind of condescending and quite patronising and stuff. You knew instantly that's just blatant sexism. You know, again, if I was going through it now, I would call them out on it. But yeah, if somebody is just genuinely either made a mistake or even just a victim of the patriarchy, and they don't realize that what they're saying is wrong, then don't embarrass them, because if you go straight to calling them out in public, then you have made an enemy, and that's when it could escalate, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know. Reece, how's it? Have you ever encountered it? Have you ever had to deal with it in your? Because you are in very male-dominated workplaces, aren't you? Have you ever seen it happen like that?
Yeah, I'm not. My problem is that if something triggers me, I don't tend to be very pleasant in my approach to it. So I'm if it affects me and it offends me immediately, it will come out. There's only one time specifically when I was, it's twice actually at the same company, and I was ready to rip one of them. I was going to rip him a new one, and the other one I was going to rip his fingers off. And I think it was, looking back, but it's not very, very good of me, but obviously it was a few years ago, and, I'm not very good at managing anger when I am angry, so one of them was that somebody had knocked over a pint of milk in the fridge, and the guy came back upstairs and said, Meriesha, because I was the only woman in the office at the time, Meriesha, someone's knocked some milk over in the fridge. Honest to God, I absolutely flew for him. So that just got left, as you can imagine. And another one was it was a guy he was clicking over the desk at me to get my attention. You click again at me, and I'll rip your fucking fingers off. But it's there, and I can't take it away and do anything about it. And what I kind of experience as sexism is a lot of the time, it's people that are almost like bigging each other up. It becomes like this shitstorm, basically, of people. One guy might say something that makes someone else laugh, and that makes somebody else laugh. I say guy, actually it could be male or female, it makes no odds. But it becomes like this big piss take of X, and I think for me it's that drives a lot of it sometimes, either a desire to boost the ego, to be liked, whatever their driver is, therefore impacts their approach to stuff. And my most recent kind of act, it was somebody they were taking the piss out of somebody else in the pub, kind of thing, but it was getting a bit much, and she didn't say anything for herself, so I was like, excuse me, and I'll just pick them up. But I'm quite happy to do that, but she wasn't. You know what I mean? So I felt like, no, it's not acceptable. You don't say that again. And he looked at me, and everyone else went quiet, and I was like, no, come on, I'm ready for the fight if that's what you want, But it was me having to help somebody else, and I just think, again, they shouldn't have been saying it in the first place, but they were all, bouncing off each other, and it was all a right laugh, but without.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? And that's exactly why people don't challenge it, because they don't want it to escalate into a situation. And this again is a very female trait, I think. It's that, just keep quiet, don't challenge it, otherwise it's going to get worse. And then it escalates into effectively workplace bullying. That's what that is, when you've got multiple people ganging up on somebody. And I think that's why they always say, if you approach it in this way of, quite quietly challenge somebody. If that doesn't work, try and find your allies first, so that you have, first of all, you have that check of, am I making this, or am I making this into a bigger thing than it actually is? But also you have then got support in the workplace. If more than one or two of you are going and saying, actually this is not acceptable, then they'll challenge it. Like in that situation, you stood up for her, she had an ally. That there are two people then realizing that it's not acceptable, aren't they?
And honestly, that annoys me a bit, that you've got to find somebody else to be able to go along with you. That's it. You know what I mean? And like Kirsty said, that an environment, she works in a female environment, and she'd be in the wrong if she was angry about something, and that's bollocks. Do you know what I mean? I genuinely don't know how to respond to that, because why would you need like a load of you to go if one person thinks it's a problem? It's a problem. Do you know what I mean? Whether it was blown out of proportion or not, there needs to be a conversation had somewhere, if it's made someone feel that way.
And I think that's sorry. No, go on, Joe.
I just, you know, these types of, I think they've just, it's become so almost like accepted or so insidious that sometimes you just do need that extra person who's not having it directed them to recognize it's not okay. Like in that moment, it's like, this isn't okay, but I actually have no idea what to say.
Yeah. But
to stop it, like you can sort of in a situation. So that kind of ally thing is, if you see it, you say it, right? It's like anything to do with whether it's sexism or racism or bullying. Sometimes the individual that it's aimed at, it doesn't even, you know, can't be that person in that moment.
Absolutely. And I do think what we also need to do, you know, as a society, is enable a situation where these conversations have been had. You know, everybody seems to be so uptight about, you know, oh God, you can't say that, it'll lead to a disciplinary and then they might lose the jobs. Well, actually, why can we not just have conversations about these things? Why can we not just say, you know, that's out of order, that's not allowed. Actually, you know, you can't say that anymore. That word might have been allowed 20 years ago, but it's not allowed now. You know, we should be able to have these conversations without it being you know, a massive deal, without people taking huge offence and being, you know, massively hurt about. I mean, they go on, don't they, about the snowflake generation. Actually, it seems to be that older generation that take so much more offence at something when actually saying, you know, you're not allowed to say that anymore, and these are the reasons why. And somebody being able to say, all right, well, thank you, I didn't know that, I've learned something, let's all move on. That, you know, as a society, surely that's where we need to work towards, isn't it?
Definitely. And sorry,
go on.
Okay, it was just because I, in prep for this, I was looking at, you know, ways that you can come back with these things, because, like, Meriesha, obviously, you've said, you know, I'll just call it out, and it may be with anger, and it might be
the right way.
No. I'm just saying, but that is. You do have a way, you know, there's a way that, and that's the way that you do it, and that is just, it comes naturally to you. You're not thinking about it. You're not thinking, oh, I've got to be a badass woman in this situation, and it's just what comes out, right? And you don't care, frankly. But you know, there's that sort of like other less confrontational way. And I actually read this article. It had really a lot of the advice. It was quite hilarious. There were a lot of passive responses. So if someone sort of says, you know, I think the example was, you know, your boss makes a comment about women drivers, you know, so you get your notepad out and go, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean. You don't need to explain it.
I thought it was a massive lesson in passive aggression.
Actually, so when you say there's a problem with women drivers, what is it you mean exactly? Let me just get. I'm sorry, I'm going to sit down for this. I'm just really like.
Are you wearing your pearls?
I'm not clutching my pearls because I don't understand. Explain to me why you made that comment about, because I don't understand. And that was actually a piece of advice, but that kind of like did entertain me. So yeah, a lot of sort of passive aggressive. It's like, oh, so I could explain it again, but I don't. But did you really say that in a meeting in front of other people and just make me feel really stupid?
Yeah,
in a very passive way.
I mean, the key takeaway from this, I think, really is there is no perfect way to deal with it, is it? There is no one size fits all. It's going to depend on the person who is having it done to them. It's going to depend on the work situation. It's going to depend on the person who's done it. And there is going to have to be a little bit of play it by ear. But the key thing is, don't let it slide. The only way it's going to change is if we stop letting it slide, and we have to be able to say, I'm actually not, whether we say it quietly, passive aggressively, or just fucking shout it. We need to be able to say, you know, actually that's not all right anymore, and that's the only way things are going to change, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And I think don't you find that, you know, I sound like an old lady, the new generation, the kids, the ones coming up
today,
they are, there is different conversations happening. There's a different approach to work. There's a different approach to, you know, to life, about all sorts of things. And I'm not saying it's disappeared in any way, shape or form, you know, don't get me wrong. But, you know, is it that, you know, people are more mindful of what is and isn't accepted in the workplace now, you know, and both male and female, or any other ale, you know, it's more a case of just, yeah, being a bit more respectful of people, you know, like society, I guess, is starting to move away, you know, from the very fact that there's not, you know, boobs in every paper these days, you know, and it's very slow, don't get me wrong again, you know, but, you know, people are not standing for it and making a deal about it to make change, you know. So I'm not saying, you know, we all stop and everything's going to be fine, but I think it's a lot less acceptable than it used to be, you know, for that underlying kind of, you know, bullshit sexism, to be honest with you, from both sides.
I genuinely do, and we are running out of time, so we're going to have to wind it up. But I think you're right, and you know, this is something we've talked about in the past. But yeah, the people call it the snowflake generation, and you know, you can't do this, and you can't do that. But actually, they have kind of got their head screwed on about what they will and what they won't accept, and you know, putting people in boxes and boundaries and things like that. So. But maybe we should be hopeful. But then we have a session coming up in a couple of weeks' time, where my auntie is going to be joining us, and because she says basically they were having this exact conversation 40 years ago and not much has changed. So maybe we are hopelessly optimistic. We know, but I do just want to make one final point. So somebody, again, I don't know who it is, but they said that they're amazed by how disinterested in feminism. Many, was it still Kirsty? Many of the younger staff members are, and I think that is a subject we'll come back to in the future. But I think that's something to do with the word feminist, because I was reading an article that said, you know, young people nowadays will not identify as a feminist. You know, they absolutely are not feminists. But if you ask them, well, do you believe in gender equality and do you believe that women should be in the workplace, blah, blah, they agree with all of that. So I think that's the thing around language rather than beliefs. But we will we have a session coming up on that later in the summer. So there we go. That's it. Any final words, Joe or Reece? Anything you want to say?
I don't think so.
No, just be more Reece, basically. Don't,
please don't. I'm not saying don't be more me.
People come and say, I got sacked for threatening to cut off my colleague's fingers.
Yeah.
Oh God, I dare you. Go on.
But if you see it, whether it's happening to you or whether it's happening to somebody else, shout it out, because that's the only way we're going to start challenging this stuff and getting equality in the workplace, which is what we all want. There we go. Thank you. So as I said, next time we are here with a retrospective look at the kind of last 40 years of feminism, and we will ask the question, has anything actually changed? So that's exciting, isn't it? Time to wave, girls. See you all soon. Bye.